Few names in Hollywood inspire as much respect as Ron Howard. Audiences first watch him grow up on television as a child actor before he transformed into one of the industry's most successful directors. Over the decades, Howard has earned a reputation for being calm, thoughtful, and remarkably easy to work with. Unlike many filmmakers known for fiery tempers or public feuds, Howard built his career by listening, staying patient, and allowing talent to flourish. But spending more than 60 years in Hollywood also means witnessing the industry's darker side. Every movie set is a unique world where massive egos, enormous pressure, and intense competition collide. Behind the glamour and flashing cameras are personalities that can either lift an entire production or make every day feel like a battle. Although Ron Howard has rarely spoken harshly about fellow actors, his interviews, memoirs, and stories from colleagues reveal that not every collaboration was effortless. Some performers carried reputations that intimidated everyone around them. Others struggled with perfectionism, insecurity, or the burden of living up to legendary status. Howard learned early that talent alone never guarantees a pleasant working relationship. Today's story explores 6 legendary performers whose reputations reflected the toughest side of Hollywood's golden age and beyond. Rather than painting them as villains, these stories reveal how extraordinary success sometimes came with extraordinary challenges. They also show how Howard developed a leadership style that would later make him one of the most respected directors in the business. Our first story begins in the quiet, fictional town of Mayberry, where millions of viewers believe they were watching One Big Happy Family every week. To television audiences, Frances Baver was kindness itself. As Aunt Bee on The Andy Griffith Show, she represented warmth, patience, and unconditional love. She cooked family dinners, offered gentle advice, and treated young Opie as though he were her own grandson. Viewers adored her because she reminded them of someone from their own families. For young Ron Howard, however, the experience behind the scenes was far more complicated. Howard was still a child learning how television worked. Every adult around him became an example of what professionalism looked like. Andy Griffith often kept the atmosphere relaxed. Don Knotts filled the set with laughter and spontaneous jokes. Crew members worked together like a close-knit community. Frances Baver was different. She approached acting with extraordinary seriousness. Having spent years developing her craft on the stage, she viewed every performance as something deserving complete discipline and concentration. Comedy, especially a simple rural sitcom, wasn't always the artistic challenge she believed she deserved. That disappointment quietly influenced her attitude during production. She wasn't famous for screaming across the set or throwing dramatic tantrums. Instead, many people remembered her as distant, reserved, and emotionally difficult to approach. She separated herself from much of the cast and preferred privacy over friendship. For a child like Ron Howard, that emotional distance could feel confusing. The woman who hugged him lovingly on camera often became quiet and withdrawn once filming stopped. Howard later reflected that he gradually realized actors and their characters could be completely different people. That lesson stayed with him for the rest of his career. It was an important discovery because children naturally assume adults behave the same way off camera as they do on screen. Howard slowly learned that acting is a profession, not necessarily a reflection of personality. Stories from cast members suggested that Baver sometimes found the playful atmosphere distracting. While others joked between takes, she preferred focus and order. She rarely joined the social gatherings that strengthened friendships among the rest of the cast. Some observers interpreted this as arrogance. Others believed it came from loneliness. Hollywood during the 1950s and 1960s placed enormous pressure on actors whose careers had changed dramatically. Baver had trained as a respected dramatic actress, yet millions would remember her almost exclusively as Aunt Bee. That kind of unexpected legacy can become emotionally complicated, especially for performers who dreamed of something different. Ron Howard didn't respond with resentment. Instead, he watched carefully. He learned that every actor carries invisible struggles the audience never sees. A difficult personality may sometimes hide disappointment, exhaustion, or years of frustration. Understanding those emotions became one of Howard's greatest strengths as a director. Years later, when directing major stars himself, Howard rarely judged people based only on first impressions. He understood that successful leadership required patience as much as authority. Frances Baver unknowingly helped teach him that lesson. She demonstrated that creating believable warmth on camera didn't always require genuine friendship behind it. Professional actors could deliver heartfelt performances even while maintaining emotional distance in real life. That realization permanently changed Howard's understanding of filmmaking. Eventually, after the Andy Griffith Show ended, Bevere retired from acting and moved away from Hollywood. She lived a quiet life far from the spotlight, rarely participating in reunions that brought the rest of the cast back together. Howard has spoken respectfully about her over the years, never choosing to attack her character. Instead, he acknowledged that she was complicated, a gifted performer whose personal struggles sometimes affected those around her. Looking back, the experience became less about conflict and more about education. The young boy who entered television believing every smiling face represented lifelong friendship left with a much deeper understanding of human nature that it was his first glimpse behind Hollywood's carefully polished curtain. But if Frances Bevere taught Ron Howard about emotional distance, the next legendary actor introduced him to something entirely different. This was a performer whose presence alone could silence an entire soundstage before he ever spoke a single word. The next chapter in Ron Howard's journey unfolded long before he became an award-winning director. He was still a very young child when he encountered one of Hollywood's most commanding personalities, Yul Brynner. Then, Brynner was already a global superstar. His unforgettable performances, especially as a king of Siam, had made him larger than life. With his shaved head, piercing eyes, and unmistakable voice, he projected authority without even trying. Whether he walked onto a stage or stepped onto a movie set, attention naturally shifted toward him. For a child actor like Ron Howard, that presence was impossible to ignore. Howard had already been raised by parents who taught him that filmmaking was a team effort. His father, Ron Howard, believed every member of a production deserved respect, from the lead actor to the newest crew member. Those values shaped Ron's understanding of what professionalism looked like. Then he found himself sharing space with a man whose reputation was built on commanding every room he entered. Crew members often described Brynner as intensely disciplined. He expected preparation, precision, and complete professionalism from everyone involved. While some admired his standards, others found him intimidating. There was little room for casual joking when Brynner was focused on his work. Young Ron quickly noticed a difference. Instead of seeing adults laughing freely between takes, he often witnessed conversations becoming quieter whenever Brynner approached. It wasn't necessarily because anyone disliked him. Rather, his reputation carried such weight that people instinctively adjusted their behavior. To a child, the atmosphere could feel overwhelming. Howard later came to appreciate that Hollywood in those years operated very differently from the collaborative productions he would later direct. The studio system often elevated major stars almost to royal status. Producers invested enormous amounts of money in their leading actors, and those performers frequently exercised tremendous influence over production decisions. Yul Brynner fit perfectly into that era. He valued discipline above comfort and image above familiarity. Maintaining an aura of mystery was almost part of his performance, even when cameras weren't rolling. Some actors preferred becoming friends with everyone on set. Brynner preferred maintaining distance. That difference left an impression on Howard. Years later, Howard often explained that the mood on a film set begins at the top. If the leading actor creates tension, the entire production feels it. If the star encourages teamwork, everyone becomes more confident. Watching Brynner helped Howard understand both sides of that equation. The legendary actor wasn't remembered simply because of his talent. He was remembered because people reacted to his presence long before he delivered a line. Howard quietly observed how crew members prepared themselves whenever Brynner arrived. Department became extra careful. Conversations became shorter. Mistakes seemed more stressful. It was an environment built around avoiding disappointment. While some productions thrive under strict discipline, Howard gradually realized that fear rarely inspires creativity. People become cautious instead of imaginative. Instead of offering new ideas, they focus on avoiding criticism. That observation stayed with him throughout his directing career. When Howard eventually stood behind the camera himself, he deliberately created a different atmosphere. Actors were encouraged to ask questions. Crew members could make suggestions. Problems were solved through conversation rather than intimidation. Many performers who later worked with Howard commented on how unusually relaxed his sets felt. That wasn't accidental. It was a result of decades spent observing every type of leadership style Hollywood had to offer. Brynner also represented another lesson. He understood the value of protecting his public image. During Hollywood's golden age, stars weren't simply actors. They were brands. Every appearance, interview, and photograph contributed to carefully constructed public identities. Brenner mastered that system. He rarely allowed audiences to see uncertainty or vulnerability. Confidence became part of his personal mythology. Howard admired the professionalism required to maintain such consistency, but he also recognized its cost. Living behind a carefully crafted image can become exhausting. As Howard's own fame grew, he chose a different path. Instead of creating mystery, he embraced openness. Interviews became conversations rather than performances. Colleagues described him as approachable rather than untouchable. That contrast became one of Howard's defining qualities. He had seen firsthand how distance could command respect, but he believed genuine trust created stronger films. There was another important difference between the two men. Brenner belonged to an era when directors often adjusted themselves around powerful stars. Howard envisioned productions where everyone adjusted themselves around the story. That philosophy would later attract some of Hollywood's biggest names. Actors such as Tom Hanks, Russell Crowe, Robert De Niro, and many others repeatedly chose to work with Howard because they trusted his leadership. Trust, Howard believed, produced better performances than fear. Looking back, Brenner's influence wasn't rooted in arguments or dramatic confrontations. It came from observation. Howard watched one of cinema's greatest icons command complete attention through confidence alone. He also witnessed how overwhelming authority could unintentionally create emotional distance throughout an entire production. Those experiences shaped the kind of director he refused to become. He wanted actors to arrive excited rather than nervous. He wanted crew members solving creative problems instead of worrying about making mistakes. He wanted every production to feel like talented people working toward a common goal instead of individuals protecting themselves from criticism. That philosophy became one of the cornerstones of his remarkable career. Ironically, some of Hollywood's most difficult personalities ultimately became Howard's greatest teachers. Each challenging experience offered another lesson about leadership, communication, and respect. But the next performer would test Howard in an entirely different way. This wasn't someone who ruled through silence or overwhelming presence. Instead, she challenged every scene, every line of dialogue, and nearly every creative decision, forcing the young director to discover that patience sometimes requires just as much strength as authority. By the early 1980s, Ron Howard was entering a completely new chapter of his career. The child actor audiences had watched for years was now determined to prove himself behind the camera. Directing a feature film meant far more than calling action and cut. It required earning the trust of experienced actors, balancing studio expectations, and keeping an entire production moving on schedule. One of the first major tests of that leadership came while working with Shelley Long. Long was already gaining recognition for her sharp comedic timing and remarkable attention to detail. Unlike performers who relied on instinct alone, she approached every scene with careful analysis. She wanted to understand every motivation, every pause, and every line before the cameras rolled. At first, Howard admired that commitment. After all, every director wants actors who genuinely care about the quality of their performances. But there's a fine line between preparation and paralysis. As production moved forward, Howard realized that Long's process often required lengthy discussions about even the smallest creative choices. Scenes that appeared straightforward sometimes became extended conversations about character psychology, dialogue, or emotional nuance. None of those questions were unreasonable. The challenge was time. Every additional discussion meant the crew waited longer. Lighting teams stood by. Camera operators remained in position. Producers watched the clock as schedules grew tighter. Howard quickly discovered that directing wasn't only about artistic vision. It was also about managing momentum. Film sets operate on carefully planned schedules. Hundreds of people depend on each department finishing its work on time. Delays in one scene can affect an entire day's production, costing thousands of dollars before anyone realizes it. Howard found himself balancing two responsibilities at once. He wanted Shelley Long to feel confident in every performance. At the same time, he needed to keep the production moving for everyone else. That balancing act became one of the greatest leadership lessons of his early directing career. Instead of responding with frustration, Howard chose patience. He listened carefully. He answered questions. When adjustments improved the scene, he welcomed them. When conversations began circling the same point, however, he learned to make clear decisions and move forward. It was an important realization. A director cannot lead through uncertainty. Actors naturally look to the person behind the camera for confidence. If the director hesitates too often, uncertainty spreads across the entire production. Howard gradually developed a calm style of leadership. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't embarrass performers. Instead, he explained his reasoning clearly and encouraged everyone to focus on the larger picture. That approach earned respect. Many actors later commented that Howard made them feel heard without allowing productions to lose direction. It wasn't always easy. Working with highly intelligent performers often meant defending creative decisions with thoughtful explanations rather than simple authority. Howard welcomed those conversations, but he also understood that every movie eventually reaches a point where someone must make the final call. That someone was a director. Looking back, Howard never described Shelley Long as untalented. Quite the opposite. He consistently recognized her ability to bring depth and authenticity to her roles. Her dedication often resulted in memorable performances that audiences connected with. The challenge wasn't talent. It was process. Howard realized that brilliant actors sometimes need reassurance more than instruction. Questions aren't always signs of disagreement. Sometimes they reflect a genuine desire to avoid making mistakes. Understanding that difference changed how Howard communicated with performers for the rest of his career. Instead of assuming resistance, he learned to identify the emotion underneath it. Was an actor uncertain? Were they protecting a character they deeply cared about? Or were they simply searching for confidence before stepping in front of the camera? Finding those answers became one of Howard's greatest strengths. Years later, many stars praised him for creating an environment where they felt comfortable taking creative risks. The atmosphere didn't happen by accident. It grew from experiences like this one. Howard learned that leadership isn't about winning every debate. It's about guiding different personalities toward the same destination. As his directing career expanded, he encountered actors with vastly different working styles. Some preferred endless rehearsals. Others trusted their instincts immediately. Some welcomed detailed notes after every take. Others wanted complete freedom. Howard adapted to each individual without losing sight of the film itself. That flexibility became one of the reasons so many performers returned to work with him again and again. He understood that every actor carried a different creative process. Respecting those differences built trust. But trust also required boundaries. Howard couldn't allow one person's perfectionism to consume an entire production. Learning when to listen and when to move forward became one of the defining skills of his career. By the end of the project, Howard had grown considerably as a filmmaker. He no longer saw directing as simply capturing performances. He understood that directing meant managing personalities, solving problems, and maintaining confidence under constant pressure. Those lessons prepared him for even greater challenges ahead. Because the next actor Ron Howard would work with brought something entirely different to the set. This wasn't quiet perfectionism or careful analysis. It was explosive intensity. A performer whose passion could elevate every scene, but whose powerful personality demanded a director strong enough to channel that energy in the right direction. By the time Ron Howard began working with Russell Crowe, he was no longer the young director trying to prove himself. He had already built a reputation for delivering successful films and for creating sets where actors felt respected. Even so, Howard knew that casting Crowe meant accepting a unique challenge. Crowe was one of the most gifted actors of his generation. His performances carried an intensity that few could match. Whether he was portraying a Roman general, a brilliant mathematician, or an ordinary man fighting impossible odds, he had an extraordinary ability to disappear into a character. That same commitment, however, often came with strong opinions. Crowe wasn't the type of actor who simply memorized his lines and waited for direction. He wanted to understand every decision behind the story. If something didn't feel truthful to him, he wasn't afraid to question it. Conversations that might take 5 minutes with another performer could stretch much longer when Crowe became deeply invested in a scene. For some directors, that approach could feel confrontational. For Ron Howard, it became another opportunity to strengthen his own leadership. While filming A Beautiful Mind, Howard quickly recognized that Crowe's questions weren't about challenging authority for the sake of argument. They came from a desire to create the most believable performance possible. Every discussion centered on one goal, making John Nash feel like a real human being instead of a movie character. Howard appreciated that dedication. At the same time, he understood that endless debate could slow production if it wasn't managed carefully. Instead of shutting Crow down, Howard encouraged open conversations before filming important scenes. They discussed character development, emotional transitions, and subtle moments that many audiences might never consciously notice. Those conversations built trust. Crow began to see that Howard wasn't interested in taking shortcuts. Howard saw that Crow's persistence came from artistic commitment rather than ego alone. Their working relationship became a genuine collaboration. One of the greatest strengths Howard possessed was his ability to remain calm under pressure. Even when discussions became passionate, he rarely raised his voice or allowed emotions to control the room. That steady demeanor proved invaluable. Film productions naturally create stress. Long shooting days, changing weather, budget concerns, and unexpected technical problems constantly test everyone's patience. When the leading actor also brings enormous creative intensity, the director's composure becomes even more important. Howard provided that stability. Crew members often describe him as someone who listened first and reacted second. Instead of seeing disagreements as personal conflicts, he viewed them as part of the creative process. That mindset helped transform potentially difficult situations into productive ones. As filming continued, Crow delivered one of the finest performances of his career. His portrayal of John Nash earned widespread praise and eventually won him numerous awards and nominations. The film itself became both a critical and commercial success, confirming that the creative tension between actor and director had produced something remarkable. Their successful partnership didn't end there. Howard later cast Crow again in Cinderella Man, another emotionally demanding film that required extraordinary commitment from its lead actor. By then, both men understood each other's working styles. Howard knew Crow would challenge scenes that didn't feel authentic. Crow knew Howard would listen carefully before making the final decision. That mutual respect eliminated much of the uncertainty that often exists during first collaborations. Looking back, Howard has consistently spoken about Crow with admiration. He has acknowledged that the actor asks difficult questions and pushes deeply into every role, but he has also praised his intelligence, preparation, and complete dedication to storytelling. Those qualities helped explain why Crow became one of Hollywood's most respected dramatic performers. Howard learned another valuable lesson through their partnership. Strong personalities aren't necessarily obstacles. When guided effectively, they can become tremendous creative assets. The key lies in understanding motivation. If an actor is fighting for personal attention, conflict often becomes destructive. If an actor is fighting for the truth of the story, those conversations can improve the final film. Howard became exceptionally skilled at recognizing that difference. He refused to confuse passion with hostility. Instead, he focused on building enough trust that disagreements never became personal. That philosophy would define much of his directing career. Many filmmakers believe leadership means controlling every detail. Howard believed leadership meant creating an environment where talented people could contribute their best ideas while still moving toward a shared vision. It wasn't about winning arguments. It was about making the strongest possible film. That attitude earned him the loyalty of countless performers. Actors knew they could challenge ideas respectfully without damaging their relationship with the director. Howard also knew when a discussion had reached its conclusion. After listening carefully, he made decisions confidently and expected everyone to move forward together. That balance between openness and decisiveness became one of his greatest strengths. In many ways, Russell Crowe represented the opposite of the quiet, emotional distance Howard had experienced earlier in his career. Crowe brought energy, intensity, relentless commitment. Managing that level of passion required patience, confidence, and mutual respect. Howard proved he possessed all three. Their collaboration demonstrated that some of Hollywood's most demanding creative partnerships can also become its most rewarding. But the next challenge Howard encountered wasn't driven by artistic perfectionism or larger-than-life personality. It was something far more heartbreaking. It involved an actor whose remarkable talent was gradually overshadowed by personal struggles, forcing Howard to confront one of the hardest realities any filmmaker can face, the painful moment when extraordinary ability is no longer enough to keep a production on course. Not every challenge Ron Howard encountered came from powerful personalities or creative disagreements. Some of the most difficult moments in Hollywood had nothing to do with acting ability at all. Instead, they centered on reliability, personal struggles, and the painful reality that extraordinary talent can sometimes be overshadowed by problems away from the camera. Few stories illustrate that truth more than the career of Tom Sizemore. For many moviegoers, Sizemore was one of Hollywood's most convincing character actors. He possessed a raw intensity that made every performance believable. Whether portraying a hardened soldier, a determined detective, or a dangerous criminal, he brought an authenticity that directors admired and audiences remembered. By the late 1990s, he had become one of the industry's most recognizable supporting actors. His future appeared incredibly bright. Yet behind the scenes, his personal life was becoming increasingly complicated. Substance abuse and legal troubles gradually began affecting his professional reputation. Producers, directors, and studios found themselves facing a difficult question whenever his name appeared during casting discussions. The issue was never whether Tom Sizemore could deliver a remarkable performance. The issue was whether production could depend on him every single day. For filmmakers, reliability is just as important as talent. Every film involves hundreds of people working together on carefully planned schedules. Camera crews, costume designers, lighting technicians, makeup artists, stunt coordinators, editors, and producers all depend upon one another. When even one key performer becomes unpredictable, the effects spread across the entire production. Ron Howard understood that responsibility better than most. Throughout his career, Howard earned a reputation for running organized, respectful film sets where professionalism mattered. He believed every member of the crew deserved an environment where they could focus on creating great work rather than worrying about unnecessary distractions. Watching gifted performers struggle with personal issues was deeply discouraging. Howard has often spoken about how heartbreaking it is to see exceptional talent interrupted by circumstances beyond the camera. He has never appeared interested in humiliating people during difficult moments. Instead, his comments usually reflect disappointment mixed with compassion. That perspective became especially important as Hollywood changed. Studios began placing greater emphasis on accountability. Insurance companies examined actors' histories more carefully. Producers weighed not only artistic ability but also the likelihood that productions would remain on schedule. It was an unfortunate reality. Even an Academy Award-worthy performer could become a financial risk if personal problems repeatedly disrupted filming. Howard recognized that filmmaking is ultimately a collective effort. No single individual, regardless of fame, should jeopardize the work of